Can I be honest with you for a second? Sometimes the most confusing pain doesn't come from being lied to. It comes from someone who keeps giving you hope, but never gives you the truth. Chapter 1. They're not lying the way you think. Here's what I think. Most people hear the word lying and immediately imagine manipulation, deception, bad intentions. But when it comes to avoidance, that picture is incomplete. Because you won't believe this, but most avoidants don't wake up thinking, how do I trick this person today? That's not what's happening. What is happening is much messier. And honestly, more uncomfortable. Avoidant lying isn't usually about control. It's about escape. And if you don't understand that difference, you'll keep personalizing things that were never actually about you. So let's talk about it, calmly, clearly, like two friends trying to make sense of something confusing. First, let's kill a big myth. Avoidants do not lie because they're bad people. If they were bad people, they'd lie confidently. They'd lie consistently. They'd lie without guilt. But that's not what you see, is it? What you see is hesitation, vagueness, delays, words that sound harmless, but never turn into action. Stuff like, let's see, I'm not sure yet, maybe later. Life got busy. At first, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Because hey, life does get busy. But then it keeps happening. Again, and again, and again. And that's when the confusion starts. You think, are they lying to me? Or am I overthinking? And that question alone starts messing with your nervous system. Can you imagine how destabilizing that is? What's actually going on in their head? Let's slow this down. Avoidants usually lie one layer before the truth. Not because they enjoy lying, but because telling the full truth feels dangerous. Here's the internal chain reaction most people never see. Truth gives conflict. Conflict gives emotional conversation. Emotional conversation gives expectations. Expectations gives closeness. Closeness gives loss of autonomy. And boom, their nervous system panics. So instead of saying the real thing, I don't want this level of closeness, or I can't show up consistently, or I feel overwhelmed by emotional expectations, they say something softer, something safer, something that keeps the door open without committing to walking through it. That's the soft lie. And here's the key thing you need to understand. They're not lying to gain something. They're lying to avoid losing control. Big difference. Why soft lies feel so convincing? You know why these lies mess with your head so badly? Because they're not fully false. Maybe later could be true. Let's see. Sounds reasonable. I'm not sure yet. Feels honest. That's what makes them dangerous. They live in the gray area, where you can't call them out, but you also can't relax. And your brain stays stuck in limbo, waiting, interpreting, hoping. You won't believe this, but that gray zone is where avoidance feels safest, and where the other person slowly unravels. Can you see the imbalance already? Broken promises aren't always intentional, but they're still real. Now let's talk about promises. This part matters. Most avoidants don't make promises thinking, I'm going to break this. They genuinely believe it in the moment. At the moment of emotional closeness, they feel warm, connected, open. So they say things like, I'll call you tomorrow. We'll talk properly soon. I'll be better. Things will change. And in that moment, they mean it. But then distance returns. Their nervous system settles. The emotional intensity fades. And suddenly the promise feels heavy. It now represents responsibility, consistency, emotional follow-through. So instead of confronting that discomfort honestly, they disappear, delay, distract. And when you bring it up, they look confused, defensive, even irritated. Because in their mind, I didn't lie. I just didn't feel it anymore. But impact doesn't care about intention. A broken promise still breaks trust. Why this hurts more than direct lying. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Soft lies hurt more than hard lies. Why? Because hard lies give you clarity. Soft lies give you hope. And hope keeps you emotionally invested in something that isn't actually stable. So you wait. You stay patient. You tell yourself you're being understanding. Meanwhile, your nervous system is doing overtime. You start questioning, am I asking for too much? Am I reading this wrong? Should I just be more chill? And slowly the focus shifts from their inconsistency to your emotional response. That's how people lose themselves, not through big betrayals, but through small repeated invalidations. Let's be honest for a second. I'm going to ask you something and answer honestly in your head. Have you ever felt like you couldn't call them out without pushing them away? You had to accept vague answers to keep the peace? You were always waiting for clarity that never came? If yes, that's not love being complicated. That's avoidance being unmanaged. And no amount of patience fixes that. Chapter 2. Why truth feels more dangerous than lying to them. Here's what I think. People assume honesty is always the easier option. Like, just tell the truth, right? Say what you feel. Say what you can't do. Say what you don't want. But you won't believe this. For avoidance, honesty often feels more dangerous than lying. Not morally dangerous. Emotionally dangerous. Because honesty doesn't end with words. Honesty leads to reactions. And reactions are what they're trying to avoid. The real problem isn't lying, it's conflict avoidance. Let's get this straight. Avoidants don't fear truth itself. They fear what truth creates. Truth creates disappointment, questions, emotional conversations, explanations, accountability. And accountability feels like a trap. So when an avoidant thinks about telling the truth, their nervous system jumps ahead and says, okay, but what happens after I say this? They imagine you getting upset, you asking for reassurance, you wanting clarity, you wanting consistency, and suddenly the truth feels like opening a door they won't be able to close. So they don't open it at all. They take the side exit. Can you imagine living like that? Always choosing the path that creates the least emotional friction in the moment? That's not strategy. That's survival. Why soft lies feel safer than silence? You might think, why not just say nothing? Good question. Silence works temporarily. But silence also creates suspicion. And suspicion leads to confrontation. So instead of silence, they offer just enough words to keep things calm. That's where soft lies come in. They act like emotional buffers. Not a hard no. Not a clear yes. Just ambiguity. Ambiguity buys time, and time gives them distance. So when they say, let's see, maybe later, I'm not sure yet, what they're really saying is, I don't want to deal with the emotional consequences of honesty right now. Not forever. Just not now. But not now keeps repeating. And that's where things start breaking. How they justify it to themselves. This part is important. Avoidants usually don't see themselves as liars. In their head, they tell themselves things like, I didn't promise anything. I was just unsure. They misunderstood. I never said definitely. And technically, they're not wrong. That's the sneaky part. Soft lies are designed to be deniable. So if you get hurt and confront them, they genuinely feel confused. They think, why are they so upset? I didn't lie. But impact doesn't care about technicalities. Emotional trust is built on predictability, not wording. And when your words repeatedly don't match your actions, trust erodes, even if you never lied outright. Why broken promises happen so often? Let's talk about promises again, because this is where most people get stuck. Avoidants often make promises during moments of closeness. Why? Because closeness temporarily quiets their fear. In those moments, they feel connected, calm, safe enough to imagine showing up, so they promise future behavior from a temporary emotional state. But that state doesn't last. Once distance returns, the promise becomes a reminder of future obligation, emotional responsibility, loss of flexibility, and suddenly it feels suffocating. So instead of revisiting the promise honestly, they avoid it. They hope it fades. They hope you forget. They hope time fixes it. That's not malicious, but it is avoidant. Why this dynamic is so damaging to the other person? Here's where I'm going to be very direct. Soft lies don't just confuse you. They train you. They train you to lower expectations, avoid asking direct questions, accept inconsistency, doubt your own reactions. You start adapting to their avoidance. You think you're being understanding, but really you're shrinking. And the worst part? They often don't even notice the cost you're paying. Because from their perspective, things feel fine. No conflict, no pressure, no emotional explosion. So they assume the system works, but it only works for one person. Quick check-in, be honest with yourself. Let me ask you something. Have you ever waited weeks for something they casually promised? Felt silly for bringing it up again? Wondered if you were too intense for wanting follow-through? If yes, that's not you being needy. That's you reacting to instability. And your reaction makes sense. Chapter 3. They think they're protecting you. Here's what I think. One of the hardest things to accept about avoidance is this. Most of them genuinely believe they're being kind. Yeah, kind. You won't believe this, but many avoidants see their soft lies as emotional damage control. In their head, they're not avoiding you. They're avoiding hurting you. And that belief changes everything, especially how they justify their behavior. Why avoidants think lying is the kinder option. Let's walk through their logic, step by step. Imagine an avoidant feels overwhelmed. They feel pressured. They feel that internal urge to pull back. Now they have two options. Option 1. Tell the truth. I feel overwhelmed by closeness. I can't show up the way you want. I need more distance than you do. They know what happens next. You'll feel hurt. You'll ask questions. You'll want reassurance. You might cry. You might ask for clarity. And in their mind, that emotional reaction equals harm. So they think, if I tell the truth, I'll hurt them. Option 2, soften reality. They say, I'm just busy. It's not about you. Let's talk later. This creates temporary calm. No tears. No confrontation. No emotional explosion. So they conclude, this is the kinder choice. And once that belief sets in, soft lying becomes a moral justification, not a red flag. Can you see how dangerous that is? Why they don't see the damage right away? Here's the problem. Avoidants are often short-term calm-focused. They optimize for immediate emotional relief. If the moment passes without conflict, they assume things are okay. They don't track the long-term erosion of trust. They don't see your confusion, your anxiety, your constant self-doubt, because you're still there. You're still responding. You're still trying. So from their perspective, see, everything's fine, but inside you're slowly unraveling. That's the blind spot. Avoidants equate no confrontation with no damage, but emotional damage doesn't always explode. Sometimes it leaks. How this turns into gaslighting without intention. Now we need to talk about something uncomfortable. This dynamic often turns into unintentional gaslighting. Not because they want to manipulate you, but because they truly believe their version of events. When you say, you said you'd call, they respond, I said I'd try. When you say, you promised things would change, they say, you took it too seriously. And suddenly you're questioning your memory, your interpretation, your emotional response. That's not a misunderstanding anymore. That's reality distortion. And here's the brutal part. They don't experience it as gaslighting. They experience it as defending themselves. Because in their mind, they never lied. They just avoided commitment. Why apologies often feel hollow. Have you noticed how avoidants apologize? It's usually vague. I'm sorry if you felt that way. I didn't mean to hurt you. That wasn't my intention. Those apologies focus on intent, not impact. And intent is where they feel safest. Because acknowledging impact would mean admitting harm, taking responsibility, facing emotional consequences, which loops right back to what they fear. So the apology happens, but nothing actually changes. And you're left wondering, why do I feel worse after saying something? Because the cycle resets. Why you keep giving them the benefit of the doubt. Let's flip the lens for a second. You stay because They don't seem malicious. They seem confused, not cruel. You can see their fear, and that empathy becomes your trap. You tell yourself, they're not doing this on purpose. They don't mean to hurt me. They're just scared. All of that might be true. But truth doesn't erase consequences. And compassion without boundaries turns into emotional self-harm. Let that land. The quiet trade you're making. Here's the trade most people don't realize they're making. You trade clarity for connection. You accept vagueness to keep them close. You ignore broken promises to avoid pushing them away. You lower your standards to stay emotionally attached. And slowly you normalize inconsistency. That's not love evolving. That's you adapting to instability. Quick reality check. Ask yourself this honestly. Do you feel calmer in this connection? Or more confused? Do you feel more secure over time? Or more hyper-aware? If the answer is confused and on edge, that's your nervous system giving you data, not drama. Not overthinking. Data. Chapter 4. Understanding ends where self-respect begins. Here's what I think. Most people don't stay stuck with avoidance because they don't understand what's happening. They stay because they understand it too well, and then use that understanding against themselves. You know why they lie softly? You know why they avoid conflict? You know why closeness scares them? And instead of asking, is this good for me? You ask, how do I be more patient? That's the pivot point. And that's where people lose years. What accountability would actually look like. Let's be very clear about this. Accountability is not saying sorry and repeating the behavior, explaining trauma without changing patterns, acknowledging harm while doing nothing differently. Real accountability looks boring, unsexy, consistent. It looks like saying the hard truth before making promises, clarifying limits instead of offering hope, revisiting broken promises without defensiveness, accepting discomfort instead of escaping it. An avoidant who is actually healing will pause before agreeing. Say, I can't offer that without disappearing. Let conversations be uncomfortable without shutting down. If you're not seeing behavioral change, you're not seeing accountability. You're seeing awareness without action. And awareness without action doesn't protect you. When understanding turns into self-betrayal, here's the line most people cross without realizing it. You start translating their behavior for them. You say things like, they didn't mean it like that. They're just overwhelmed. They don't know how to communicate. All of that may be true. But here's the hard truth. You are not in a relationship with their potential. You're in a relationship with their patterns. And patterns don't lie even when people do. If you constantly excuse behavior that hurts you, your empathy is no longer kindness. It's self-abandonment. The one question that changes everything. Forget, how do I make them feel safe? Ask this instead. Do I feel safe being honest, direct, and emotionally real here? Because if your honesty leads to withdrawal, silence, or soft lies, that's not safety. That's emotional conditioning. You're being trained to ask less, expect less, feel less. And that's not maturity. That's erosion. Why walking away feels so hard? Let's talk about this because people lie to themselves here. You don't stay because it's good. You stay because the connection feels rare, the good moments feel intense. You've invested emotionally. You're hoping insight leads to change. And yes, avoidance can be deeply loving in bursts. That's what hooks people. But love in bursts doesn't sustain trust. Consistency does. And consistency is exactly what avoidants struggle to offer until they choose to heal. This is the line in the sand. You cannot love someone into honesty. Be patient enough to fix avoidance. Shrink yourself into emotional safety. At some point you have to decide, am I staying because this relationship is growing, or because I'm afraid to let go of what it could be? That answer tells you everything. Let's end this cleanly. Avoidants don't lie because they're evil. They lie because conflict feels dangerous. Danger triggers escape. Escape looks like soft lies and broken promises. Understanding that gives you clarity, but clarity is useless if you don't act on it. So don't ask, how do I tolerate this better? Ask, is this the kind of love that lets me stay whole? And if the answer is no, That's not failure. That's self-respect finally speaking.